Hi, and welcome to the Spawdcast. My name's Carrie Hyde, and I'm your host and your pet's life coach. Today with me on the couch is Whitney Arruda. Hi,
Hello.
Whitney.
Hi there. How are you doing?
Most of you know Whitney is the manager over at the spa, but she's also a huge animal lover. And when I told her we were going to be doing this topic that we're so excited about, she jumped at it.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to be talking about wolves, and particularly the reason we want to talk about wolves is because there's a lot of controversy, and you know Whitney and I are both pet nutritionists, and so we hear a lot of stories about what a wolf eats, and what that means is that your pet should eat like a wolf. And so we thought it would be a really good idea for us to bring on a wolf expert so that us domesticated animal lovers aren't running around saying what wolves do when we don't actually even know what a wolf does. And I've never really even seen a wolf. One time I saw a juvenile wolf in the wild. That's another story. I spent some time in Yellowstone. But we wanted to hear from the wolf expert. So I want to introduce you to our next guest, Tom Gable. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fabulous. The fact that I have a wolf expert talking to me right now is like, I feel like a little kid.
Right?
Like I'm just so, I know, I'm just so excited. So we just want to welcome you, and hopefully you're going to be able to shed a little light for us a little bit. But you're involved in a project called the Voyageurs Wolf Project, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get into it, I just need to know, have you always been interested in wolves?
I would say, in a sense, yes, but then maybe in another sense, no. I think I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life until I was in college, and really, I had always done outdoor stuff, but I didn't know that was going to be a vocation for me until I got into the middle of undergrad. And so up to that point, I always thought wolves were cool, and most animals. And it wasn't until I got into college and started thinking about careers, I was like, wow, wouldn't that be cool to study wolves? That would just be really neat. And so once I kind of figured that out and started exploring that career path, then that sort of really got into my brain as like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure it was going to happen because there's really not that many people who study wolves in the world. And a lot of people want to do it, and there's not that many jobs. So it's very fortunate to be in a position where things did work out, and I can study wolves as a job.
Wow.
That's
what
cool.
school did you go to?
So I did my bachelor's at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, which is a small liberal arts school. Then I did a master's at Northern Michigan University, where I looked at wolf-beaver interactions for my master's. And then I just finished my PhD from the University of Minnesota, studying wolves in the greater Voyagers ecosystem. So it's basically the same work we're doing on our Voyageurs Wolf Project.
That's amazing. So when you started college, you said you figured it out in college, this is what you wanted to do, but what did you start out as?
Clueless is what I would say. I just kind of went to college because I, knew you should go to college, and my folks were really pushing me to do it. And so I just kind of went, and really I had no idea, no clue. I had a brief stint my sophomore year when I decided I would try computer science because I thought, I like computers, sort of. I mean, in a very general sense, not in that. I realized not in that sense. And so I quickly got into that and realized, like, this is not where I should be. And I didn't know what to do. And ironically, at that time, I met a good friend of mine, Austin Homkis, who was going to do wildlife research. And that was like, wow, I'd never thought about that. And as I started thinking about that, I realized that's what I want to do. The ironic part of it is Austin is actually now a full-time field biologist up here on the project with me. So he and I met 9 years ago, and when I started my master's research on wolves, I convinced him to come help me with that, and we've both been up here ever since. So that's pretty exciting.
So, wow, that's awesome that you guys got back together and started doing that. When you study wolves, right, we know they're kind of aloof, right? They're not, I don't know that much about wolves, but I'm assuming they don't just come run up and say, take my blood.
That is correct.
Yay, I know something about wolves. So how do you study wolves?
So wolves are, they're challenging animals to study, not only because they're wary of people, but also because there's just not that many, a landscape can't support a ton of wolves. At least the way we think of it. We think about a lot of animals, like if you look out on a cornfield and there's a bunch of deer or something. But with wolves, you might have 4 or 5 wolves spread over a 60, 70 square kilometer area, which is a typical pack in our area, pack territory size. So there's just not that many running around the woods, relatively speaking. So that makes it also challenging. The way we study them is we fit wolves with GPS collars, and the GPS collars take locations every 20 minutes. And then those collars send the locations to a satellite, which sends them to a website. And so we basically get real-time tracking data on where these wolves are going. So we use those GPS collars to study their predation behavior, to understand where they're having pups, to understand where the pack territories are, things like that. We also use other technologies such as remote cameras to observe some of their unique predation behavior, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. And then also to understand things like pack composition. So how many wolves are in the pack, how many of those pack members are pups, how many are adults. We can monitor all sorts of things with remote camera. So those are our primary tools that we use. And then a lot of the other work we do is just grunt work of just, being in the field, hiking, bushwhacking all the time. Because those pieces of technology give us sort of the raw materials to understand them, but then we have to do something with them. And that's where a lot of the real work comes in, is traveling to all the places wolves go and putting in that time. So it's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of work. And I think a lot of it is not as glorious as it probably looks on TV or in our social media or things like that.
I know I spent some time in Yellowstone with a wolf expert, and I was particularly interested in wolf diet and wolf scat and wolf poop, however you want to call it, because I'm interested in diet. But then I wanted to do a further one, which was like a week. And when I found out what that entailed, I chickened out, because it was mostly in the winter and it had to be deep into Yellowstone at like minus 20 degrees with me and a binocular.
Okay.
And I thought, yeah, it's probably not as glamorous as I kind of thought that it was.
I have a question. So with these tracking collars, what would you say the percentage of wolves that have the tracking collars as to how many are still out there?
So that's a good question. Typically we try to get 1 to 2 wolves in each pack collared. Sometimes that works great and sometimes it doesn't. I would estimate we probably have anywhere between 10 to 15% of the wolf population in our area collared. So we estimate that we have about 70 to 75 wolves in our area, which is a 700 square mile study area. So it's not a small area. And we probably have 10 of those collared, or with functioning collars. So sometimes you put out collars and, like all technology, it works for a little bit, and then for whatever reason, it just stops working. The problem is when it's on a wolf, there's no way to get it back and figure out what's going on, so it's just kind of lost. So I'd say that's probably about fair. It's 10 to 15% of the total population.
Yeah.
So when you decide to track a specific wolf, is it that way? Are you looking specifically at, we want to track this wolf, or is it just kind of, we saw this wolf? How do you get the tracking device on him? Does he have to be sedated and then you?
Yep. So they have to be sedated. And so the way we do it is we use foothold traps that have been modified. So they're rubber padded, and the wolf steps in them and it holds the wolf's foot. And the rubber padding is to prevent any damage to the foot. And these traps have been modified quite a bit so that they are good for capture and release. So once we catch one, we then come in, we sedate it. And once it's sedated, we do sort of a full workup of the animal by collecting a bunch of samples like hair, blood, ticks, all sorts of different things that we could collect, take a lot of measurements. And then we also fit the wolf with ear tags and then a GPS collar. The ear tags are on there with a unique identifier. So if the collar, for whatever reason, falls off the animal or something like that, we can keep track of them. Okay. Because a lot of the GPS collars also have what are referred to as drop-off devices, which actually allow the collar to disattach from the wolf once the battery sort of runs out. Sometimes those mechanisms work, sometimes they don't work. But anyway, so that's why the ear tags are in there. We have a lot of questions on social media from people who ask why do we need the ear tags when we have the collar? So that's why. So usually it's a pretty quick process. Usually by the time we sedate a wolf, and then by the time we're done, it's about 40 minutes or so. And it takes the wolf a while to, sort of get back to it, because capturing any wild animal, whether it's wolves and whether you're using a foothold trap or a box trap or anything like that, is stressful. They do not want to be caught. And then you sedate it, and anyone who's had their wisdom teeth out or something like that knows what it's like to come out of being sedated. It takes a little bit, but usually within about 24 hours or so, they're back to doing what wolves do, hunting and killing their prey or interacting with other pack members, or back to the den or something like that.
The pack will accept them back in. I don't know about Whitney, but we've always heard, like, if you touch an animal, then
the mother's
your
not going to come back
scent
for
is
it.
on them, and then has that been a problem? Or is that an old wives' tale?
That is, I think that's true for some animals, like deer. There's been research on moose that's shown that as well. If you touch like moose calves when they're really young, the females often abandon them. That's not the case with wolves. They'll go right back to their pack members or back to their pups or something like that. So there's never been an instance where we've known, say, a wolf was part of a pack, you put the collar on, then all of a sudden, like, nope, pack, chases it away. I'm sure the other wolves look at it and are like, that's an interesting, thing on your neck or something like that. And we often find when we recover the collars, the plastic's been gnawed on a lot. And in early wolf research, it was a real problem to figure out how you could make collars that the wolves other pack members couldn't destroy, because they would want to chew on the belting of the collar, like dogs do, they like to chew. But we've never had that issue. And the same thing is true with, we do a lot of work looking at wolf pups and wolf pup survival. And part of that work is visiting dens when the pups are really small. And then we also put little microchips in the pups so we can keep track of them as they become adults. And the same thing there is wolves just do not abandon their pups, which is why we can do that work. Otherwise, you never would. But they just don't do it, so we can go in and we can tag the pups. And certainly, again, these things definitely are short-term stressors. The female or male that has is the parent of those pups definitely, doesn't want us there. I mean, that's true of any wild animal.
Sure.
But they are not going to leave their pups. They're going to come in the moment we're out of there. They're going to come back and tend to the pups, which is great because that they're going to be fine.
Oh my gosh.
Sweet.
I just have this vision of a wolf being, caught and researched and then getting sent back to his pack and telling him how he was abducted by aliens.
Probably.
And no one believes him. And he's like, no. And then they put these needles in my arm and they did all this stuff. And now he's the crazy in the wolf pack, right? So
something like that.
When you get samples, what are you looking for? Are you running like any kind of vitamins, minerals to see what they're generally? I know you're looking for overall health, but are there specifics you're looking for?
So a lot of the samples we collect are largely for, I'd say, archiving purposes, where we don't necessarily have a direct, project that we're going to use that for, but we know it might be useful down the road. So hair is a good one. For example, you can get genetics off of a hair sample. You can also get diet by looking at the hair and looking at the stable isotope signatures in that. Okay. So those are things that we know we could use later on if we come up with a project or have funding that allows us to look at that. Blood can give us a lot of insights into a variety of things, including diseases, again, genetics, diet, all sorts of things like that. So generally, we're just sort of collecting things sort of preemptively, so that when projects or things come along, we can look at them. We don't have there's nothing that we're looking at specifically as sort of a marker of health. The only thing that we really use to assess the animal's condition is we feel for fat between its pelvis and vertebrae. And we sort of have what we call a condition index, with 1 being like the wolf is in horrible condition to 5 being like this wolf is in great condition. And you could do this with, even a dog. You can just feel between their pelvis and around their vertebrae there. And if a dog is, in good physical condition, not health, but condition, meaning it's got good fat reserves and things, you can feel that. And when it's in bad condition, you can definitely feel it. So that's what we're really looking at, because food and fat reserves are probably going to be the biggest indicator of a wolf's general well-being. Because if they're diseased, they're probably not eating, meaning they're not going to have really good fat reserves. And if they're doing great, then they're probably going to have great fat reserves.
That's awesome. I know that there's lots of reasons why wolves would die in the wild. Do you know what the number one cause of their death is?
So in areas where wolves and people are coexisting or co-occurring, generally human-caused sources of mortalities are the primary cause. And so human-caused things could be poaching, legal hunting, vehicles, I'd say, legal and illegal hunting and killing are the two biggest, sources of mortality for wolves, where humans and people are co-occurring. When people are sort of out of the mix, the number one source of mortality for wolves are wolves killing other wolves. That's the primary. So like in places like Yellowstone National Park, that's really prevalent because there's this big protected area and a lot of wolves in that area. So we generally see both of those sources of mortality because in part of our study area, which is Voyageurs National Park, people aren't in there hunting and things like that. And so when wolves die in the park, typically it's from wolves killing other wolves. Sometimes it's starvation or disease, but typically it's from other wolves. Then we go south of the park where there is there's not legal wolf hunting, but there's legal deer hunting and things like that, and people will poach wolves, and that's when we see illegal sources of human-caused mortality. So people and other wolves are the two main sources.
Okay. Wow, that's unfortunate, right? You did mention disease. I know we have in our domesticated dogs a huge amount of diseases. What diseases do you see in the wolves?
So we haven't done a ton of disease work in our stuff just because that's not been a focus. But I mean, some of the common ones with wolves are pretty much the same ones as you get with dogs. Particularly ones that can particularly impact wolf populations are things like parvovirus or distemper, particularly with pups. I mean, that's generally when you're looking at like how is disease going to really impact, say, a wolf population. If, a bunch of pups get parvovirus and die or something like that, that's going to have a huge impact because no new pups are getting added to the population in the following year. Other typical things such as mange, which isn't really a disease, but is a parasite. Those are issues. So a lot of the things that impact dogs are going to impact wolves, or could impact wolves, I should say. We haven't really seen anything to indicate that there's, a large prevalence of really bad diseases going around in our area.
Right.
But it's also something that'd be hard to know. I mean, the only way we'd really get a hold of that is by doing a lot of disease sampling or seeing a bunch of wolves that are all dying for some reason.
Yeah.
And you haven't seen that, thank goodness.
Based on your experience, would you say that cancer is something that you would see in wolves, or I know you don't do a lot of research on it, but I would feel like you would be able to see if an animal died from cancer. Have you seen any of that, or think that might be a cause?
No, and I'm sure there are instances in the scientific literature where people have seen that. I have not. Most of the time, it's probably because, it's possible that like when we find a wolf that's died, for example, we generally do a necropsy or an autopsy of the carcass and look for a cause of death. If oftentimes it's quite apparent, you can tell it was either killed by other wolves or shot or hit by a car or something. If it's something that comes down then to disease, often then we'll send that into a lab, a specialized lab that can look at them. And oftentimes, it's something like starvation. They had some other complications, liver failure, or something like this. And I mean, these are not very common cases for us because most of them are not dying that way. But I cannot remember a single one that cancer was an issue.
Okay.
Wow.
Which is really unfortunate because it is, I mean, we're seeing it in really young pups
Super
in the
prevalent.
Domesticated world. It has become prevalent. So, which is going to lead me to a little bit of a question. You had mentioned that you'll find ticks on wolves. So what about Lyme disease? Is that found on our wolves?
So that's a good question. I'm not sure if wolves in our area have Lymes. I'm sure they do because we have Lymes, in our area. When we collar wolves in the springtime, that's when ticks are prevalent. And wolves are basically like tick magnets. I mean, there are literally sometimes thousands of ticks on them because their coat is just, they're going through and they're just accumulating them. And we pull off, engorged ticks because that just, why not?
Right.
And, wolves will have ticks lining their eyelids and their ears, everywhere. And, that's not surprising. So I would say, I don't think Lymes, whether or not wolves get it or not, I'm not sure. I'm guessing they do.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's actually having any sort of detrimental effect because if it was, I mean, I suspect with the amount of ticks wolves get, they would all have Lymes because they get that many ticks.
That's such an interesting observation that they're loaded in ticks and not showing symptoms of Lyme. Not that they don't have it, but that they're not showing symptoms. And the reason I bring that up is because there's been a lot of talk in Domesticated is if we feed our wolves, our domesticated animals, and treat them more like a wolf in certain respects, which we'll get into, the body would naturally fight off the Lyme. And that's what it does for our wild animals. So it's interesting to talk to somebody. I had no idea that they had ticks all over them.
No, I didn't think.
And to not be showing symptoms. I mean, because here with our domesticated animals, you know, you can have a dog get 1 or 2 ticks on them, end up with Lyme, and then get really, really sick. They can't recover from it. So
Sure.
that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about, in that same respect, what about heartworm, right? So that's another thing our domesticated animals are taking medications for. But do we see heartworm in our wolves that are out running around?
You know, I really don't know about heartworm, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, we have cut open, you know, when we find dead wolves, we will cut open some of their internal organs and look through them. And nothing that I can recall, you know, where we've seen heartworms or something like that. I'm sure, you know, I'm sure it happens.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't say we do a ton of work with a lot of the health aspects of things, so I'm probably not the best person to ask.
That's okay.
Just because we don't see that many.
Right.
You know, wolves do have all sorts of other parasites that they'll, you know, be the host of. You know, it's not uncommon for us to find wolf scats with long tapeworms in them and things like that. A common disease that, or a parasite that wolves carry is called Echinococcus, which is a really can be gnarly for people if you ingest the eggs of that parasite. You know, foxes, coyotes all carry this. Dogs can carry it too. So that's a common parasite, and that's one of human health concern quite a bit. But outside of those, I can't really speak a lot to the parasites and things like that wolves are maybe the host to.
Does a healthy wolf shed that parasite pretty well without symptoms?
No, I don't know, honestly, you know, because I'm not, you know, we never get to observe
To
them,
that
and
part
I
of
really
it?
haven't done a lot of, I've really not done a lot of digging
Okay.
to like understand it, other than knowing that, wolves are hosts to these. I think things like Echinococcus, I don't think that really bothers the wolves that much. I think they're just part of the life cycle.
Yeah.
And it just sort of, you know, they're a host and then they pass it and then gets eaten by a deer or moose or something like that, and the parasite's
And
life
it all
cycle
just keeps
continues.
the cycle going.
Species is species.
But that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of pet advocates and pet nutritionists talk about how important it is that we feed. We call it on our side a species appropriate diet, because there's a lot of thought in that these diets actually help our animals shed naturally stuff like heartworm and Lyme disease and those kind of things. So that's why it's so interesting to me from my standpoint is if they're getting loaded in ticks and they're not showing symptoms and they have access to heartworm and they have access to all these, they're becoming hosts, but they're not getting sick is interesting. But let's jump into well, first, let me ask you this. Are there different species of wolves, like in different parts of the countries? Have we found different species of wolves?
So for most of North America, the wolf species is just Canis lupus, or what we consider the timber wolf or the gray wolf. There is a subspecies in New Mexico and Arizona, the Mexican wolf. That's a subspecies, not its own species. Down in the Carolinas, there's the red wolf, which is its own species. And then there's there's many scientists who think that there's a distinct species of wolf in and around Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario called the eastern wolf. And, you know, there's some people don't all agree, or some scientists don't all agree with that, but there's been quite a bit of work to show that they're genetically different. But most of the time, people are just talking about gray wolves, and there's regional variation in the size and the appearance of them, but they're all the same species for the most part.
Okay. And the gray wolf is what we talk about being, you know, what our domesticated dogs were descendant from, ancestors of the gray wolf. So that's what we're talking about is the gray wolf at this point. So let's kind of talk a little bit about what the gray wolf does eat. What is their main diet?
Sure. So most gray wolves, unless you're in a very unique ecosystem, are going to rely primarily on ungulates, which are hoofed animals. So they're going to eat deer, moose, elk, caribou, things like that. And so that's going to be the primary year-round prey of wolves. During the winter time, or by winter I mean places where there's snow and things like that, wolves are going to almost exclusively eat those kind of prey. During the summertime, though, wolf diets can be a lot more flexible and change quite a bit, as there's a variety of different food sources that can be available to them. Wolves are opportunists, or referred to as generalists or opportunists, that are good at taking advantage of a variety of different food sources. Most of what wolves eat is going to be meat-based, but there are instances where they will eat non-meat foods, such as fruits and berries and human garbage and things like that. So they're pretty good at finding food wherever they can.
So wolves are classified as carnivores, sort of. Can you explain that a little bit? And why they get classified that? How do they classify them as that?
So carnivores, so I should back up. There's sort of like a technical definition of what a carnivore is in a scientific sense, and it's part of the group of animals called carnivora. And part of that's anatomical, not diet-based. So, for example, black bears are part of the carnivora, but they're almost entirely omnivores. But how we refer to them sort of generally speaking, with carnivores, which are meat eaters, and omnivores, which sort of eat both, and then, herbivores. Most people call wolves carnivores because the majority of their diet is just meat. And so that's why we think of them as carnivores. And their physiology, particularly their dentition, is made for cracking and crunching bones and eating meat. So they've got their big carnassial teeth, which are the big molars that wolves and even dogs have. And so that's meant for shearing and cutting and eating meat. And so that's why they're thought of as carnivores. But we also or scientists refer to them as generalists, because their diets are general enough that they are flexible and they can take advantage of things that might be a little different than just meat. Whereas, say, something like a cat or a cougar or something like that, they're really well adapted for eating meat, but they're not a generalist. So they're not going to go around and start eating berries and other stuff like that. They have to eat meat.
Right. That's important to understand, because we do have some controversy in our industry. Whitney and I have witnessed it many times, where people get really stuck on that a wolf only eats bone, meat, blood, and all of that kind of stuff. So do they eat the fur?
Yep. So they'll eat the fur. The fur it's hard to eat a deer without eating fur.
Sure.
Or a beaver or something like that. So they definitely ingest the fur. They ingest, pretty much the only part of an animal that wolves typically don't ingest is the stomach contents. They oftentimes, they just don't want to eat that. Now, I'm sure they eat some of it incidentally when they're, eating the internal organs or something like that. But it's not, oftentimes they'll actually nibble all of the meat around the stomach, just leaving the stomach contents.
Wow. What is so interesting about what you just said is, one of the arguments I hear a lot of people in our industry talk about is that wolves eat fruits and veggies. They get it. They say they get it because they eat the stomach content of the rabbit that they eat. But you're saying that they rarely eat the stomach content. So it's interesting.
So, with a rabbit, maybe they do, but rabbits aren't, a primary food source for wolves. If they're small enough, I'm sure wolves just eat the whole thing because they're not particular. They're not going to surgically, nibble at a rabbit's stomach.
Right.
But with larger prey like a deer or a moose, where it's, their stomachs are huge, it's a little bit easier to be selective and to not eat.
And that's
the
the
stuff you don't
least
want to eat.
thing they're interested in is the stomach. That's interesting. So when I spent the time with the wolf expert in Yellowstone, she actually took me down into a wolf den. And not in it, but around it, and then told me I could go in it. And I said, no way, in God's earth am I crawling through that thing. Even though she assured me it was abandoned.
Safe.
But what I noticed in that den area, above ground, I guess, so to speak, was an elk kill that had taken place there at some point. But the bones were all there, and none of them looked like they had been eaten at all, or even... they were clean, definitely clean, and you could see a little bit of marks on it, but they didn't actually eat the whole bone. Is that something that would be just unusual that I experienced, or do they actually eat the entire bone?
So I think it depends on two things. The one is how big is the prey that they're killing. So for example, an elk is going to be much bigger than a deer, so the bones are going to be thicker, harder to crunch on. The other is how hungry are the wolves. And the reason hunger is important is if wolves are really hard pressed to find food, then they're going to utilize a lot more of the carcass or of their kill, meaning they'll crunch on bones to crack the marrow out or things like that. But if they're having a lot of success hunting and killing their prey, they're not going to sit there and crunch on hard bones and vertebra and things like that when they can easily go kill another one. So oftentimes when they're doing, so that's why biologists oftentimes record how much of a carcass is actually consumed, because that's often an indicator of how well the wolves are doing. And so typically in the wintertime, wolves aren't spending as much time consuming literally everything because they're doing pretty good in the wintertime and they're able to kill prey pretty readily. In the summertime, though, that's when it's sort of the lean season. And so during the summer, it's pretty common for wolves, at least in our area, to utilize everything. So we often find deer that are killed and consumed by wolves, and the only thing that's left are the stomach contents, and that's about it. Some hair, but they eat pretty much everything else. You will find some fragments of a bone, but they'll crunch and eat everything else, or at least they'll haul it away and we never find it. But you show up and it basically looks like there's nothing left.
Wow. That's interesting. I thought
Seems opposite.
it seems opposite. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I felt like they would not have enough food in the wintertime and have all sorts of food in the summertime. Why is that? Are the prey just slower in the winter?
I guess.
So, effectively, the way to think about it is during the wintertime, most of wolves' main prey, such as deer and elk and things like that, are in their lean season now. So they've put on a lot of weight during the wintertime or during the summertime, eating high quality grasses and vegetation and things like that. But now it's winter and they don't have access to that. And then there's snow that's brought in. And this is particularly important for deer. Once the snow gets deep enough, it's really hard for the deer to move through that snow. So they're trying to find food. There's not very much around. So they're eating into their fat reserves, and it's really challenging to move. And so wolves, on the other hand, can oftentimes, when the snow gets deep, stay on top of it, or they can run a lot more readily. And so they're going after prey that are sort of reaching sort of exhaustion or depletion of their own sort of internal fat reserves and things like that.
Right.
And so wolves can easily outrun them and have not always easily, but oftentimes, maybe more readily is a better way to put it. They can more readily outrun deer and elk, and so they do really well then. And this is particularly true as you get further and further along in the winter, because that's more like the further along or their prey have had less and less food and are eating more and more of their fat reserves as you get further into winter. So oftentimes wolves just end up doing better and better and better as you get into late February and March and things like that. Whereas in the summertime, it's the opposite, because their prey now have access to all sorts of good food. And so they're in really good physical condition, and wolves have to try to take those animals down or to catch up with them, and they just can't do it. Or oftentimes they can't do it, or they don't even try because they realize it's futile because their prey are in good shape. So that's also why we see wolves taking advantage of a variety of food sources in the summertime, is because they can't catch their main prey. I have no doubt that if wolves could catch deer all the time, they would never go eat blueberries, because that's not going to be advantageous for them to eat, say, blueberries or other stuff. But they just can't catch them, and so they have to resort to other food sources.
Wow, talk about the opportunities.
Yeah.
Wait till your prey gets fat and can't run, and then go get them, outside.
So that's what you're saying with the blueberries. They only really eat those out of necessity. They don't really get anything from it. Like, I would think they would go eat blueberries because they want certain nutrients. It's more just kind of last resort.
Yep, that's exactly what I would say. So they might be getting some nutrients or vitamins or something like that. That's possible. But I do not think that they're going to eat them because of those purposes. Okay. I think that I think the big thing is that their other food is just not there. And so they need something to slow weight loss. And so blueberries in our area is a way to slow the weight loss. Wolves can taste sweetness. And so that helps them, maybe it tastes good. It can make them feel full because they just can fill their belly with it. Probably in the same way that drinking a bunch of water or something can make us feel full, even though it's not adding a whole lot. And it doesn't require a lot of movement to get a bunch of blueberries. And so we consider blueberries to basically be starvation food for wolves, meaning that they're at a point where they're starting to starve or lose weight, and so they eat blueberries. And this is based on actually a lot of other studies looking at how foxes and coyotes respond when they're fed fruit diets, because coyotes and foxes are even more omnivorous than wolves are. And so there's been some interesting captive experiments where scientists have fed foxes and coyotes fruits and seen what happened to their body condition. And basically in all these studies, the animals started losing weight when they're eating a strictly fruit-based diet. And so we suspect that wolves are definitely in that same ballpark, that as they're eating just blueberries, they're starving and they're losing weight. And the blueberries are just probably a way to slow the weight loss.
To get them through till their
next meal.
Till their prey fattens up and so they can catch them. Yeah, it's all a plot. It's all.
Yeah.
But so we had spoke before this about the video you have of the mother who, eats the blueberries and then regurgitates them to feed to her babies. So there is some sense of them knowing there's nutrients enough to keep their pups alive, right?
Well, it could be one of two things. It could be, I don't necessarily know about nutrients, but it could just be food, like whether or not wolves have a conception of, their food having nutrients like we understand it,
right,
is hard to say. It could be simply that when an adult wolf eats berries, they feel full. And so they just assume that this is food for their young. It also could be that during the period of time when wolves are eating berries, that's the only thing in their stomach. And when they come back to the pups and the pups start licking their face, it's almost an automatic response where they regurgitate, and whatever is going to be in their stomach is going to come out. And if they're only eating blueberries, then it's going to become blueberries coming out. So it's possible. I mean, it's we can't rule out that they don't view the berries as good food for their pups, but we also can't say that's exactly what's happening, because there is a sort of explanation that could show that's true. If nothing else, even if say wolves are just it's sort of almost incidental that they're regurgitating blueberries, it still shows that that's the only food that they're able to find at that time of year. And so and if it's slowing the weight loss for the adults, it's probably doing the same thing for pups too, of filling their stomachs and slowing their weight loss, which is really important for pups to at least not be losing weight during the summertime.
How long does a wolf pup nurse on the mom?
Typically 4 to 5 weeks is going to be nursing, and they're eating solid food starting about 5 weeks or so.
Yeah. So this is a random question you may not know the answer to, and I apologize. I shouldn't bring guests on that I'm setting them up for failure. But I'm formulating some diets for people right now, and I'm trying to stick with AVCO standards, and for their purpose, they want me to. But AVCO has this range for vitamin D, and we know, I'm sure you probably know that, well, maybe wolves don't synthesize vitamin D through the sun, is what I've learned, at least for our domesticated dogs. They don't. Yeah. Maybe wolves do, but okay. I heard. How would a wolf get vitamin D? And if they do get it from their diet, what diet? And how long can they store it? Do you know that?
I'll be honest, I have absolutely no idea.
Okay. I was hoping, because I've been trying to research it, because I'm like, if AVCO wants them to have all this vitamin D, but they don't get it from the sun, what other sources would they have it? So I thought you might know that, but I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put that out on you.
No, that's totally fine. I mean, I think most of, when it comes to looking at wolf diets, the things that we're really looking at is basically biomass intake. Like, how much food are they eating?
Yeah.
And is that enough to sustain them? I think when it comes to things like macronutrients and micronutrients and all this different stuff, and vitamins and minerals, is almost something we don't even consider, because it doesn't really matter in a sense if they get those, because if they don't get enough food to sustain them, it doesn't matter how good or bad that food was. In many instances, wolves eat food that we would look at and just be like, oh my gosh, like, I can't imagine being sustained on, eating these things, or of our own dogs,
right.
living on those foods. In the springtime, for example, wolves frequently scavenge the remains of old kills from the wintertime. So they'll go around and all they will basically eat is the hide and bones, dried bones of old kills. And you look at it and just like, what on earth are they getting out
How
of these?
old?
I mean, it just seems like could be 3 months, 4 months.
Just sitting out there, just getting salmonella and all this.
There's just, and most of the times the carcasses are already pretty much cleaned up in a sense, where, it literally is just bones and hide. And they go back and just crunch on bone and, probably try to get some marrow out. And they do that for many weeks, because late spring is another sort of lean time for wolves, because once all the snow goes away and the vegetation starts greening up, then their main prey, deer, are sort of free in a sense from the winter conditions. And so they're able to move around. And so now wolves are hungry. They've got pups to feed and they've got to find food. And so they'll start going after beavers. Occasionally they'll find a deer that's vulnerable, but a lot of times they're just scavenging old food. And scavenging is a very natural part of their sort of natural history. And again, you look at that and you're like, I don't know how they're sustaining themselves on that. But they do. Figured it out for a long time.
That's interesting, because in my industry, we have somebody who's very brilliant, in my opinion. His name is Billy Hookman. There's a plug for you, Billy, from Answers, a company called Answers. And he speaks quite a bit about the fermentation process that goes on when an animal dies and how another animal eats it, because they ferment a lot of their foods. And one of their arguments is that wolves do get fermented stuff that sits out for a while and possibly turns into that, and they get it in their stomach and it's good. So it's interesting to hear you say they do go back and eat a kill that's been there for, weeks at a time and possibly fermenting and doing all that. It's interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how often does a wolf need to get a good kill to eat to sustain themselves? Like, do they once a week or every other day or?
That's been a question a lot of biologists have tried to figure out. And it's hard to know exactly how long they could go in between. We definitely have had wolves that we followed that have gone 10, 12 days at a time without making a kill and consuming food. And they're probably losing a lot of body weight during that time. Wolves are very good at this, so their body weights fluctuate quite a bit seasonally, whereas they're putting on a lot of weight in the wintertime, and then in the summer they're really lean and thin. And most people who see them think they look diseased in the summertime because they're that thin. Typically speaking, wolves are going to be making a kill in the summertime every 5 to 7 days, maybe. At certain times it might be a little more. For example, when deer fawns have their young in this late spring, early summer, it's this pulse of food. When all these young deer are out there. And so the wolves will try their best to kill as many as they can while they can before those deer fawns get too big. But then after that, then it slows down quite a bit, because then the food dries up again once those fawns are old enough. So there's really sort of periods of booms and busts for them. Times where they'll be eating a kill every few days, and then times where they'll go maybe a week, 2 weeks at a time without any food.
So how much of their day is spent hunting, resting? I'm trying to get to a point of, one of the reasons I brought you on is to have people understand that I'm not against feeding your pets, your domesticated animals, a diet like a wolf, but we do have to understand all of what a wolf does.
All the activity they do
right?
as well.
So if we're going to feed high fat, high protein, high, vitamins and minerals that we do. So how often what does a typical day look like as far as hunting? How much of the day do you think is spent doing that?
So an estimate is that, wolves spend about a third of their time hunting.
Wow.
Now, I think the challenge is it's really hard to differentiate when a wolf is moving, are they hunting or are they just doing something else? So I would say that that's probably fair. We've never tried to calculate it, partly because we can't even observe the wolves in our area. So it's hard to know outside of their GPS collars saying the wolf is moving, what's going on. But wolves do spend quite a bit of time, bedding down and resting. That's, it's not uncommon for them to spend, 8, 10, 16 hours a day resting. So they're not on the move literally all day. There are days where they will move a lot. But there's also days where they don't move hardly at all because they're resting or they're bedding. And that happens a lot, especially after, say, they've made a kill, where they'll gorge themselves and then they'll just wait, or they'll just rest for, 20 hours. They'll hardly move as they digest all the food. So it is variable, but I'd say that's, I guess a typical day is a lot of resting and still quite a bit of moving, but certainly more resting than moving.
Yeah. How long does it take them? I often say to Whitney and I both, to our clients, is to, we put a bowl of food down for our dogs and they eat it in 1.2 seconds. Like, it's gone. And then they go and they lay down. How long do you think I'm a big supporter in extending that eating thing for their brain activity. How long does it take a wolf normally from the time they hunt and then eat and then go through that process, do you think?
When a wolf, depending on the size of the kill and whether or not they're sharing it with other wolves, going through and processing or eating a kill can be, be a multi-day event at times. Part of that's because the way wolves eat is probably not dissimilar from the way domestic dogs eat, except for the fact that they've got 100 pounds of food to consume. And so they're probably eating it maybe with some of the same vigor that we see dogs attacking their food, but they're going to eat 20 pounds of it. So if you put, say, 20 pounds of food in front of your dog, probably take them a long time to eat that at a certain point. And that's probably, and then obviously there's the challenges of tearing through muscle and bone and internal organs. But typically when wolves make a kill, the first thing they're going for are the internal organs. They're ripping open the chest cavity and the stomach or the abdomen and eating that stuff. And they probably can mow that stuff down pretty fast just because it's soft.
Yeah.
And so they gorge themselves, and we've seen trail camera videos of our wolves after they've eaten, and their stomachs look like they've got a giant basketball in it. They've just absolutely,
like the puppies when their stomach's all.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So they look huge, right? And that's because they're processing a crazy amount of food. And then they go rest and they wait until it's passed, and then they come and they eat another sort of gorging. So it definitely takes a lot, and it's probably the way they work through a carcass is they eat all the best stuff first, and then they kind of work their way back until they're eating, bones and stuff like that. So it's definitely can be a long process, but it's also others, when it's smaller prey, it can be a pretty quick process. So if they are going after, say, deer fawns that are newly born deer fawns, their bones aren't very strong, and so wolves can eat one of those in 20 minutes. They'll just, those are 8 pounds of food. So they just, must sit there and crunch, and it's gone.
Oh, jeez. I feel like I need to get on your team and go study the micro and macronutrients that I'm interested in, because I'm particularly interested in vitamin D right now. But I don't know that I can watch. I watched a bear eat a baby fawn one time with my kids, and they were young, and we didn't know what was happening, and we're like, look at that bear, it's so cute. Yeah. And then all of a sudden we saw the little white spots on the deer, and I was like, oh my gosh, don't look. I don't know that I could do that, but I'm so interested in how, and I think our clients should understand so we know that they go straight to the organ meat, so we can assume that is that's the highest value that they're going to. I'm sure that they have to be concerned that something else is going to come along at any minute, and they might as well get the best first, right?
First, yeah.
We know that they eat the fur probably for its fiber, I would assume.
I'm guessing they don't actually eat the fur for any purpose other than there's no way around it.
No way around it? Okay.
Like that the skin has some value in it, and that as they're tearing into it, I just think it's one of those things that maybe it serves a purpose like that.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that they're not choosing to eat it, other than it's a way they have to eat it to get to other stuff. Okay. Because oftentimes, particularly in the winter, the thing that you find most is big chunks of hide that they've ripped off and left. And if that was something that was really valuable, it seems unlikely that they would leave it.
Yeah. So what? So we know you have them on video eating blueberries. We know that. What about anything else that you've seen them eat, like tree bark or grasses or weeds or dandelion roots, mushrooms or?
So I've never seen, outside of blueberries, the only other sort of vegetable matter that we've found or vegetation that we found in scats has been grasses, where they sort of eat grass, presumably like a dog, to sort of scour out their intestinal system. And then that gets passed. And so you'll find scats where it's basically the whole thing just a wad of grass. And clearly it wasn't something they didn't digest it at all. But that's been the idea, is that it sort of just scours out their intestinal tract. Other than that, we've seen some other fruits in our area, such as raspberries and wild plums and things like this, that they'll eat from time to time. But otherwise, that's really the only vegetables or vegetation that we've seen them eat. I'm not sure. I mean, we've had people ask us about like mushrooms, and it's one of those things that we can't confirm or deny.
Right.
We've never seen evidence or thought that they're eating mushrooms, but if they did eat a mushroom, there's no way we'd be able to see it in a scat either. And I'd be really shocked if they're eating mushrooms for nutrition or just for calories. But I can't say it doesn't. I'm sure a wolf has eaten a mushroom. I just don't know how frequently that occurs.
Oh my gosh. See, I need to come out there, and that's going to be my focus. My dogs, when I'm out walking them, it's the only time I see them eating grass. But if I'm out on a hike and there's some wild grass that I know doesn't have any pesticides sprayed on it or anything, they'll eat grass. I've assumed it's because they're thirsty and they're getting some kind of moisture from the grass. Because if you've ever chewed on grass, it has some water in it. So I don't know if you think that could be a possibility of why you're finding grass, because maybe possibly I don't know what the moisture is in that area that the wolves are, if they have a lot of...
They have a watering hole, or if they're just...
There's a lot of water in our area. I mean, it's basically one giant swamp. I mean, not really, but that's sort of what it's... I mean, there's water everywhere.
Yeah.
So we think it's likely serves just the purpose of just cleaning out their tract. And that's what even, not only in our work, but there's several other references to that in the scientific literature. And that's what everyone has sort of thought is the purpose of it. Because oftentimes those scats are not mixed in with a lot of other like fecal material. Oftentimes it's just like hair, or just grass, with some hair sprinkled in it. And so it's sort of like it's not like they're eating a big meal and then just chowing grass and that's mixed in with their scat. It sort of seems to be something specific at certain times. And so that's, I think, why people assume that it's to sort of scour out the intestines.
That's interesting.
That's interesting.
Whitney and I did a podcast a while back with an organization that has a farm, and they would use dogs to help keep the wolves off their property. Have you seen that done to protect the wolves? Are there, I know you said that a lot of the wolves are being killed by, humans, and we're shooting them and killing them. Have you had any success in your area that you know of with using dogs to protect farms so that we can stop killing them?
Not in our area, and that's largely just because we're not really a big, there's not that much farming going on. We do have one ranch in our area that has a lot of issues with wolf depredations, where wolves are killing cattle, and we work with them, and that ranch has tried a lot of non-lethal techniques, which have worked with varying degrees of success. But I think it's just not as similar to, say, Western environments where people are able to use things like livestock guarding dogs or something to protect cattle because it's open and it's big. And in Minnesota, that's just not, I think, often practical with the way the way farming and ranching is done in this area.
So once you get all of this information, how is that going to? What's the benefit of it, right? Because I'm going to be donating to you, and I want our listeners to be able to keep this project going. What are the benefits for us as a society to keep researching these wolves?
So we think it comes down to two things. The first is sort of the scientific knowledge. So the scientific knowledge, we've published all sorts of work looking at how wolves, what's their role in ecosystems like northern Minnesota, and particularly how their predation behavior on different species, such as beavers in our area, which we haven't talked a lot about, but wolves eat a lot of beavers in our area, and beavers are ecologically important species. So how does wolf predation on beavers impact the ecosystem? And we've shown through our recent work that wolves actually impact where wetlands form by killing beavers, which is really interesting. So part of it's trying to understand just wolves' role as a species, as an apex predator in our ecosystem. And there's all sorts of other sort of ways that ties into management of not only wolves, but also of their prey populations as well. And then obviously documenting these unique dietary sort of predilections that wolves have of eating berries. And we've also seen wolves eating fish and things like this. These just help us really understand how diverse wolf diets are. And then we think the second biggest sort of value societally is our outreach, where we really try to make a point of sharing our work and really making our project accessible to the public. A lot of wolf research and wildlife research in general is done by agencies and things like that. And oftentimes it's challenging to really know what's going on. What is the project doing? And there always seems to be sort of a barrier between the public and then the biologists doing the work. And our hope is to really break that barrier down and to be able to make our project accessible. So we have our social media where we try to share sort of real time what's going on with our project, unique things that are happening. And we try to answer every comment and message that people have. And we get hundreds of them a week. And so that's really our goal, is to do that. And that works on many levels, or benefits the wolves and people on many levels, in the sense that through sharing what wolves are like, it sort of fosters an appreciation for them and for what they do. And I think education is really important, so people understand what wolves really are like and then what they're really not like. Because there's all sorts of ideas and stereotypes and things like that. And our goal is to just sort of cut through the middle of all of that and just share, this is what wolves do. And if you think that's good, you think that's bad, that's really sort of a personal perspective. But we want people to at least come away being like, you can't argue the basic facts. Like, this is just what wolves are like.
Right.
So that's what we think it comes down to, is doing a lot of the scientific work, really trying to do a lot of the cutting edge research, and then also trying to be sort of really cutting edge on the outreach side of things too, and find ways to engage and interest people so they look at it and they're like, I learned something today, or whatever. Mm-hmm. I have a question about wolves, and maybe it's silly and maybe it's stupid, but I want to ask it and get an answer, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah. No, it's so important for our ecosystem, but particularly with our listeners, I think we can't continue to figure out how to make our domesticated animals are dying younger and younger and younger. Mm-hmm. And they're dying from cancers, and they're dying from pancreatitis, and they're dying from heart conditions, and they're dying from all of these. They have diabetes. And so if we're really truly going to try to find out, we have to go to our closest ancestor of them and try to figure out if we can in some way mimic everything to a certain degree. Obviously, there's some variations we need to do, but that's why we brought up, it's so important for us to see, like, how much time do they spend hunting? How much are they eating? Are they fasting? You said that they can go, you've seen 10 days, right, as your average that they're going without food. Can we, mimic that a little bit with our domestic animals? So for our listeners, I think that aside from the whole as a society, this is an important project to be involved in, but for the health of our domesticated animals, it's very valuable. Yeah. Do you ever have any volunteers? Can people come in, aside from giving money, can people volunteer at your program? Can I come?
So we definitely get a lot of people who want to come do work, or, come out with us in the field. We've been trying to handle it. COVID's really thrown a wrench in those sort of things for us, just with research protocols and things. Sure. But on a typical year, it really ends up depending on where we're at with things. The challenge with our area is that there is a lot of water, and getting around is really difficult. And frankly, the other challenge is we've had so many people who want to come that if we let everyone come who wants to come, I wouldn't be able to do any work, because we would have people with us every single day. Yeah. So we do have people who volunteer. We get typically people right out of undergrad who come and they actually work on the project for 6 to 7 months and help do all the field work.
Wow. That's
cool. We do like to have people who are reporters and things like that if they want to come to the field. So that might work. You might fit in that category nicely.
I'll fit in any category I need to fit in.
So we've got to, but it's one of the great things about, a lot of people knowing the project, is people want to come, and it's one of also the challenges too for us of wanting to make it accessible, but also having to balance the wanting to show people everything and also wanting to do our research. And that's something we never expected, honestly, if that would be a challenge for us. But it's become that way.
It's always a challenge. This is on a side note, but I love to talk to our clients, right, at the spa. but I also love to work on the animals. So I'm always in this huge, like, I need to go in the back and be with the animals, but I can't talk to you. And so
Yeah.
I completely understand that struggle and how important
Yeah.
it is. What about volunteers as far as like helping you guys with like outside of being there and kind of being in the way? Is there, I mean, I'm not, but there's a lot of techie people. Maybe they can help volunteer by answering questions on your Facebook pages or something. I'm trying to help.
Well,
I want more
Sure, yeah,
research.
absolutely. I appreciate that. I think probably one of the best things that people do, or the most helpful way, is just by sharing honestly what we do with more people. I mean,
Right.
that's really our best way.
I
Our
agree.
goal is to disseminate this, and the more people that share it and know about it and tell others, and the more people who start following the project, the better and the larger audience we reach. And that's really our goal, is to make it a sort of a good outlet for people to get information. And we have a lot of people who do that, who are sort of loyal, they're always sharing our content. That's great because it lets us reach people, and obviously helps with visibility online and all that sort of
Awesome.
junk that comes along with social media, maybe.
I know.
But
It's the good part of
but,
social media.
yeah, so I think that's really the best way. And we have people who ask us these same questions a lot. How can I help?
Yeah.
And that's been the best one, is telling people. And I can't tell you how many people we've had who've messaged the page and been like, I had a friend who told me about your project and I started following it, and like, that was the coolest thing ever. Now I share it with everybody, right? And so that sort of spread is really powerful.
That's cool.
So tell us, how do we get a hold of you if we want to just know more, follow more, donate something, volunteer someday when COVID's over? How do we do that?
So the best way, there's really two ways. The one is go to our website, which is voyagerswolfproject.org, and there's a contact, I think it's contact us or something like that. And it's got an email address, and that email address, I check that daily. And then we also, all the comments or all the submissions there go to me as well. Or you go to social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, send us a message, and I'm the one who handles all of that. And we'll generally try to answer within a day, though it's been challenging depending on the volume of messages we get, but that's generally the goal. So if people want to get a hold of me or of our project, that's probably the simplest way. And typically we get back to people pretty quickly.
Cool.
And is there a donate thing that they could, if somebody wanted to donate money, is there a link on there that they can do that?
Yep. So on our website, there is a donate tab. Or you can just do voyagerswolfproject.org/donate. And that'll take you to a link that we have a fund set up at the University of Minnesota. And all of the money donated to that fund goes towards funding our project.
Awesome. Awesome.
Cool.
Whitney, do you have any more questions or anything?
Yeah, I
else?
actually meant to ask this earlier. What is the average lifespan of a wolf that dies naturally type in like the wild?
So the average lifespan of a wolf is between 3 to 5 years.
Oh.
An old wolf is getting to be a wolf that gets 7, 8 years of age is a really old wolf. We've had some wolves that have made it to 11 or 12, or that's our estimate based on their tooth wear, and that's really, really old. And most wolves that live to be 8 or 9 years of old, or 8 or 9 years old, are starting to have significant wear on their teeth, and by the time they generally get to be 10 to 12, their teeth are so worn down and broken that they're just slowly starving to death. And we've had some wolves that have starved to death because they're just not getting food, and that's mainly because their canines are broken off from grabbing meat or from grabbing prey or things like that, and then their carnassial teeth are totally worn down and chipped, and so basically all of their teeth are just nubs. And at that point, it's just going to be a slow death, unfortunately. So, but wolves live a very fast, like hard-paced life. That's generally the way they do it, and so it's not uncommon for wolves to die, a year, 2 years of age, either because some do starve to death too. I mean, that's another natural source of mortality is starvation. We had one a couple of years ago that starved to death or during the summertime. So they don't live very long. Generally speaking, there's a lot of population turnover because of that. They're not long lived like some other predators are.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. It's really sad. You know, I think about how we can get our the longevity of our canines, our domesticated canines longer, but that's because we can take care of their teeth and we can, you know, those kind of things we can do, and we can, you know, make sure they're not getting killed. So
Well,
that's
back
awesome.
to their teeth. I know that you said that they get like ground down, but do you ever find any buildup on the teeth? Like
Plaque.
if there's plaque and tartar or?
We've never seen that, probably because they're just constantly chewing on, you know, I mean, the way that they eat, you know, is going to constantly be scraping away that.
That's such
so
a
we've had
good
many
question.
people
Yeah,
remark.
that's good. That's cool.
Because our domesticated
we've had-
dogs are horrible.
Riddled with like disease in the mouth because of the food.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's
Yes.
interesting.
So I would say that, you know, part of that is, or we've had a lot of people on our social media who've seen, we post pictures of wolves' teeth from time to time, and they're like, wow, their teeth are so clean.
Ooh,
And
I'm going to
that's
get that
probably because-
picture.
Yeah.
We're going to post that picture because we are big on dental and making sure that the dog's teeth, because it leads to so many problems. So, Tom, I'm going to have to let you go. Thank you so very much for being here. I'm going to be contacting you. I'm sure my media team can fly out there if I can. Whitney and I have a trip
be cool.
planned that we can come out and possibly do stuff. But again, we will be donating. I'm hoping our listeners will donate. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And Whitney, thank you as always for being here with some fabulous questions and helping us.
Happy to be here.
So now you're not only helping the wolves, but you're helping domesticated dogs. So see, you just broadened your whole your whole education is just like that in an hour.
Yeah. Well, thanks a bunch for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening and tuning in. All of the information that you heard here is just brought to you by some fabulous people who volunteer their time to get some information out there. All of the connections that you need to make to get a hold if you want to donate to the Voyageurs Wolf Project will be on our show notes, as well as the SPA's Facebook page, which is avaspa.com. So make sure that you either go there. You can follow us on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, I would recommend it. So you can watch this video if you're just listening to the podcast for the Spawdcast. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And as Tom said, please make sure to share all of this information. We can't get enough information out there if we're not sharing it with other people. It's very valuable to get more people to know, to help. Okay, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.